Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report podcast. I'm your host, Vago Muradian. Our podcast is brought to you by Bell. Since 1935, Bell has been redefining flight. Learn more about its pioneering spirit at bellflight.com. Had the deadly coronavirus not intervened, we would have been in Tampa last week to cover the National Defense Industrial Association's annual SOFIC, the world's leading special operations conference and trade show. Now we are covering the virtual version of SOFIC, VSOFIC, where our coverage is sponsored by Bell, Elbit Systems of America, and Leonardo DRS. Joining us now is Ramez Naam, who was the keynote kickoff speaker at VSOFIC. Ramez is a technologist and science fiction author of the award-winning Nexus trilogy about a scientist who develops a nanodrug that can interconnect people's thoughts and all the challenges that goes with it. Ramez, thanks very much for joining us.
Vago, it's a pleasure.
It's becoming increasingly common for outside thinkers to participate in traditional military conferences. It's a tremendous trend. We spoke to General Clark last week, who talked about some of his priorities. You made an inspired choice, in part because you work, with the nexus of technology and innovation and societal and technological trends. Your talk at SOFIC was rated one of the best ever. What was your message to the VSOFIC audience?
My message was really that the world is changing faster and faster due to technology that's getting cheaper, that's getting smaller, that's getting more democratized out to more people, that we have companies able to do what only nation states could do not that long ago, and small teams or individuals able to do what only big corporations could do, and that we have to either adapt to this greater and greater pace of technology diffusion and the disruption that it brings, or be disrupted by it.
And what are some of the best examples you think? Because, right, innovation is also about risk tolerance. It's about empowerment of folks. I think militaries can be very good at both, but they can also culturally be a little bit on the conservative side and try to rely more on that which used to work and make an incremental shift. Talk to us about what are some of the best innovation lessons and failure lessons from your standpoint that militaries should try to emulate. Even though they've been working on this for a couple of years and we do see some progress, there are always some clear examples from the real business or academic world that could prove valuable to a military audience.
Well, let's start with some examples of how the world is changing, right? If you go back in time a decade or so, and you told someone the word drone, what would they think of? They'd think of a Predator, right? Or maybe a Reaper, something like that, a multi-million-dollar aircraft that does military missions. And now if you say the word drone to someone, they think of DJI Phantom 4, right? Something that's less than $1,000, has tremendously lower capabilities, but for the price of one MQ-9 Reaper, you can buy 20,000 DJI Phantom 4s, right? And so that dissemination of technology at lower and lower prices means that small players that intrinsically, because they have a smaller command structure, if you will, or a tighter decision loop, so there's less people involved, uh, have the ability to embrace the new more rapidly than large entities that have a more traditional, monolithic, top-down decision-making culture. And that's the challenge both for in the business side, for the business audience that was there at VSOFIC, and for our military itself.
From a technological standpoint, right? I mean, this began in the Obama administration warning that this democratization of technology is going to be a real leveler between the United States and make us much more peer competitors as opposed to even near peer, right? Where the asymmetrical advantages the United States enjoyed for decades has been evaporating. What do you think are the most profound, sort of broader strategic trends that we need to be adapting to if the United States and its allies are going to maintain their advantage in this sort of leveled world?
I think one of the biggest trends is that the technology innovation and super high tech often came out of the military, right? That military and NASA and so on drove a whole lot of the innovations in the generations of military technologies that have evolved up until now. But now we see it being driven by the consumer sector, and then in some cases being pulled back in. If you look at what's happening with machine learning, for instance, all this great AI technology, self-driving cars, medical diagnostics, AIs that can look at an X-ray and do as well as a human, facial recognition. The companies that are producing this are Google, Facebook, Amazon. They're the ones that are funding the fundamental research, or some universities are, and then they're publishing this research. You can go download something called TensorFlow from Google, which is literally the AI libraries that they use. You can even train your AI on Amazon's cloud if you'd like to, or on Google's cloud or Microsoft's cloud. And so that capability that is so game-changing. Imagine having, facial recognition in a compact drone that can, with no wireless signal, enter a space, find a person, and deliver a small payload to them, right? That's a horrifying asymmetric warfare, terrorist sort of situation. That, that asymmetric adversary, and I'm not even talking about a nation state, a small player doesn't have to develop that tech. They can literally go up to Amazon, one-click train, get these technologies. I'm making it sound a little bit easier than it is, but because it's coming out of the consumer space, it's extremely rapidly available to people around the world.
So what's the way for governments to rapidly adapt to this new environment? Because we find ourselves, again, back to the conservatism of how we tend to look at things. How do we need to look at this future to adapt best to it? Because it's potentially terrifying, right? I mean, it's precision strike in a whole different new way than what we've imagined it to be.
Yeah. No, clearly, DoD is not blind to these things, and we see, if in the example I just gave, a lot of investment in anti-drone technologies, for instance. But the bigger picture is, in this era of technology changing ever faster, the organization that can most rapidly experiment with and adapt to the new technological realities and figure out ways to put them to use or defend against them is the one that's going to win. And so that means shortening the decision time. It means empowering people at all levels in the organization to try new things. It means acknowledging that the way that progress happens is often through experimentation, and many experiments don't work. We'd call those failures, but encouraging people to try things, even if they are going to fail, sandboxing that failure, if you will, but learning from it to try to iterate as rapidly as possible.
Give us some examples of sort of things that were highly innovative, moved fast, were the product of a lot of failure that ultimately proved to be sort of game changing, that in your mind are real models to emulate, or at least approaches to emulate.
Here's a really a model of integrating that deep into your organization. So at Amazon, the experimentation happens all the time. Same Amazon, Microsoft, Google, when you go to the website to try to do a search or whatnot, you're constantly being experimented on. So imagine a feature like Amazon's product recommendations that tell you, hey, based on what you've bought, you might like X or Y or Z. That literally brings in billions of dollars of revenue every year to Amazon by itself. That's the result of massive experimentation. That there are thousands of experiments tried on that every month to try new tweaks in the algorithms and see what works best. And the way that Amazon works is that if you have a brand new employee, or someone who's been there for a year, let's say, and she, a 22-year-old programmer fresh out of college, wants to experiment with a change to that feature, the default answer is yes. In fact, in many cases, her manager won't even be in the decision loop. She just gets to go and run experiments, try new things, and see what actually improves things. Now, to do that, like, that sounds horrific, right? That sounds like crazy, like chaos, anarchy. You're going to crash the site, hurt the brand, hurt customers. But to do that, Amazon has invested probably billions of dollars in platform technologies to make it safe for experimentation. If there was a risk of crashing the site whenever an experiment was run, you'd never run experiments. So instead, Amazon has test beds where literally you can run an experiment, 1% of the site traffic gets routed to that experiment. If that test bed crashes, it stops routing traffic there. All of these things are done to make it safer for people to try new things, because Amazon knows that speed of experimentation, that number of experiments that are being run, how accurate they are, what's the latency, what's the amount of time it takes to get data back from them, is the key to them moving faster.
And I should point out to the audience that you led teams that worked on Outlook, Internet Explorer, Bing, and a lot of other technologies when you worked for Microsoft before your current career.
That's right.
What do
And
you? Yeah, go ahead.
well, literally at Bing, I was in charge with one peer of search quality, of how good are the search results. And I didn't get asked of, should we try this? I mean, I would give feedback on what I thought good directions were. I'd give input. We'd track what was happening. But literally, engineers would try new experiments without asking their bosses, right? Because we didn't want to be in the way. Collectively, our set of engineers and project managers and so on had more intelligence than me as their boss, right? And so you want to unblock that and give people the go ahead to move forward and fail fast.
How easily is that replicable in other organizations? Because each one of these firms is full of a lot of, even if they're young and innovative and creative people, there's also some fairly formidable technological savvy that comes with these people, right? So we can unleash you in part because you you were bringing a lot of very discrete skills to that original party. How replicable is this approach for other organizations that may be somewhat more varied in educational background and technical acumen?
Yeah, clearly talent is an issue, but its culture is even more of an issue. And so what we find is that organizations, corporations, but also organizations like the U.S. military, can have an immune system, a corporate immune system, an organizational immune system. And so when you come in and say, here's how we're going to do things different, a lot of people just don't like change or just want to be told what to do, and they dig in their heels and they say, that's not how we do things around here. Or they might not even be aware of it, but they subvert the process themselves. So often what you have to do to have a faster pace of innovation is to innovate on the edge, is to create a new organization that doesn't operate by all the same rules as the old one, and maybe even has the mandate to disrupt the old one, and is protected from and uh, able to go around the usual decision-making processes. So I'll give you an example of that. When Steve Jobs built the iPhone, most people at Apple, the large majority of Apple employees, had no idea. What he did was, Apple has whatever, it has a hardware organization, a software organization, marketing, the CFO, et cetera, et cetera. What Jobs did was he created a separate organization that reported directly to him. He put them in a separate building on campus. If you were an Apple employee, your key card would not open the door to that building. And he told them that you guys are empowered to go around the organization, pick the best and brightest, tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, we're working on the future of the business. We can't tell you what it is, but it's awesome. Do you want to come join us? And then most importantly, that the iPhone organization didn't have to go through all the same usual processes. They didn't have to, go through a certain set of reviews and organizational
Mhm.
decision-making structures that just slowed things down. So they could move very fast and try to do things quite differently than what the rest of the organization making the Macintosh and so on was doing.
Let me ask you a little bit about quantum computing, if you don't mind. There
Mm-hmm.
are a couple of things that have always been sort of 5 years out, right? Like lasers for the longest time. It'll be in 5 years, And now we've sort of turned the corner where directed energy is getting to the point where it actually can deliver operational benefits. And quantum computing was one of those technologies. And I remember talking to the guys at D-Wave, Bo at D-Wave, like 5 years ago, and he was like, "No, I think with this time, really, in 5 years, we're going to start to get to a threshold." And Google last year achieved quantum supremacy. Um, from your perspective, how game changing is that going to be? Is that something that, a little bit like artificial intelligence, is oversold? Right? What should our expectations be of a quantum future, and what do we need to maybe start to do now, given how fundamentally game changing it should be, to
Right.
prepare ourselves?
So, I mean, what we know right now, it points to a picture where quantum computing is a less general technology than AI. AI, machine learning in particular, is actually, it might not, we're not going to have sentient AI anytime soon. What we have is very amazing pattern recognizers that we can build for any specific domain that can often exceed human performance. And so I think AI actually is a transformative technology. Quantum computing is more concentrated, if you will. There's a certain set of problems, optimization problems, search problems, for which one day quantum computers will be dramatically, insanely faster at than traditional types of computation. Now, a lot of those are problems that are sort of invisible to a lot of people, but there's one very, very important problem there, which is cryptography. And so at some point, if we look at the sorts of cryptographic keys we use to encrypt data today in the civilian world and in the military world, most likely, those become vulnerable eventually to quantum cryptographic attacks, because the technical thing is that uh, factoring numbers, which you have to do to break a key, is very, very hard to do on a traditional computer. But for a quantum computer, it's a search problem, which can be
Right.
massively parallelized and can happen enormously faster than a traditional computer.
Well, and Hartmut Nevin, who led the Google supremacy team, spoke at a Washington think tank earlier this year, and his message was along that line, that from a cryptological standpoint, it's potentially a complete game changer, and whoever gets there first gets to read all the messages they haven't been able to decrypt over the last 30 years, and sort of you may have some explaining to do, at that point, while you also better secure your communications. Let me get your take on how you think coronavirus is, you know, how different, how game changing will it be, right? There are folks who are talking about the future of the office. There are folks who are talking about the future of connectivity, um, right? Medicine. If we manage to develop a vaccine as quickly as we have, that's a dramatic breakthrough, both in collaboration, but as well as being able to do concurrent development and testing and what have you. From your standpoint, as you look at a post-coronavirus world, what do you see as opportunities, and what do you see as potential pitfalls?
Let's say first, we have to be realistic and be prepared that the coronavirus pandemic is going to continue for 2 years, maybe more. Right? This is not going to be over next month, and so there's a lot of thinking just in that short to medium term of just how to keep your organization running, both on the business side and on the military side. Uh, I would believe that after this is over, for most of humanity, things go back to more or less how they were. There are some changes, there's more use of video conferencing and so on. But coronavirus will be a fast forwarder of a number of technologies, of rapid development of medical diagnostics, maybe some technologies of rapid vaccine development, some specific ways that we're looking at making vaccines that we've never used in the past, and also for the ability to work as distributed teams. And so to a certain extent, what we'll find is that coronavirus is going to help people figure out what they can do. Now, a lot of people reflexively are going to say, I want to go back to how things were. We're just used to having an office environment and so on. But the opportunity is there to look at all the new ways that we're operating right now and say, how much of this should I keep? after coronavirus passes. What maybe going back to how we were before shouldn't be the default. And I think that has big implications. If we can do remote work, we can have staff all around the world working together, and that can potentially do all sorts of things, from lowering costs to increasing resilience and so on. So I think the opportunity is to take what we're learning and see how much of it we decide we want to keep afterwards.
From a national security perspective, are there any takeaways that you have?
One thing I'd say is that the Pentagon has spent a lot of money and a lot of effort on bioweapon defense. And now we find that our economy is laid low, not by a human cultivated or human designed bioweapon, but by a natural one. And I think to a certain extent, we failed to learn from the experience of other nations. Part of the reason that you see Asian nations doing better with coronavirus is because they all went through SARS. And because they went through SARS, they instituted simple things like thermometers, laser thermometers for checking the temperature of people everywhere. Use of masks became much more commonplace in their culture. And so one of the great skills that humans don't naturally have, but that is incredibly effective if we can do it, is to learn from the mistakes or experiences of others. And I'd say the US and Europe as well didn't learn from the Asian experience. Even now, if you look at, this is getting a bit away from DoD, but getting into Homeland Security, if you look at the experience of flying into Hong Kong, when you get to Hong Kong, you are given a COVID PCR test, the most accurate form of DNA test. You're sequestered for about 8 hours in a secure but very kind, thoughtful facility, waiting. And at the end of that, if you test clean, you're allowed to go back into your world. In other places, in China, you're given a tracker that you wear and have 14 days of limited mobility and so on. In the US, I mean, this has been going on for, it's been 4 months since the first deaths that we knew of in the US. There's nothing like that in place when you fly into the US from overseas, let alone if you fly from state to state in the US. So we have to start thinking about defense in depth. And it's not just DoD, it doesn't start at the national border, it's kind of throughout our society. And there's some work to catch up there, and there's some learning we can do from other nations.
Are you surprised that in an era of this kind of connectivity with this kind of access to information that we've sort of fouled it up as badly as we have? Is that surprising to you?
We have underperformed. The United States of America is capable of far better than this. So we have definitely performed below our capabilities in this regard.
Ramez, thanks so much for joining us. Really, really appreciate it. It was an absolute treat having you on. You're welcome back anytime. Thanks so much for taking so much time with us, and I hope you and yours stay well.
Vago, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
And thanks for joining us. Please follow our daily interviews with top government, military, industry, and thought leaders at Defense and Aerospace Report, and subscribe to our weekly newsletter. Follow us on Twitter at DEFAERO Report. That's at DEFAERO Report. Like us on Facebook at Defense and Aerospace Report, and check us out on LinkedIn. And check out our weekly cyber report sponsored by Northrop Grumman. For more than 80 years, Bell has pushed past the boundaries of what's possible to drive aviation forward, going above and beyond flight. Bellflight.com. Thanks again to Bell for their generous sponsorship, and we'll see you again tomorrow.